Having spoken at length about science fiction, I thought it only right that I turn to the other major half of speculative fiction. That is, of course, the fantasy genre. I still stand by what I said in my science fiction video. In general, I don't find fantasy as thought-provoking, philosophical, or interesting in terms of ideas as I do science fiction. However, that might just be because I've read a lot less. In general though, it's okay to read for pleasure, and I certainly find fantasy very pleasurable to read. In my last video, I received a bunch of really amazing suggestions on science fiction books I had left out or hadn't read. People are very passionate about that genre, and I'm sure that people are equally passionate about the fantasy genre. And you'll quickly see from this list that while I've tried not just to include the most famous books, I'm not the most well read in this genre. And so I'd be really excited to read your suggestions on fantasy books that mean a lot to you. So please do let me know in the comments down below, because I read a lot of these suggestions. My name is Harry Smith, and this is Pages to Practice, a channel all about taking what is written in books and putting them to work. Today, I've selected a bunch of fantasy books that I think are worthy of your time, whether you love the genre or not. Some of them because they're good literature, some of them because they have something interesting to say, or some of them are just fun. After professing my love for The Quantum Thief, and because of my affinity for high stories, then maybe the inclusion of The Lies of Locke Lamora by Scott Lynch should be no surprise. I have a huge amount of respect for this series, the Gentleman Bastard series. In a fantasy setting reminiscent of Venice, this is a joyous and imaginative retelling of the rogue thief story at its best. Lynch manages to constantly upend the tropes of the genre, building a fantasy world that is rich with detail without resorting to cliché. This book is a glorious world-building feast. Amusingly, on Goodreads, Patrick Rufus, of the fame of the Kingkiller Chronicles, left a 5-star review which is worth reading. The two authors are often compared for their skillful but poetic prose. Of the many major oversights that my science fiction list had, maybe Ursula K. Le Guin was the most glaring, or Isaac Asimov. However, that's because I knew that I was going to make this video, and I wanted to talk about this author with the book A Wizard of Earthsea. The most impressive thing about Le Guin might be how celebrated an author she is across so many different genres, and A Wizard of Earthsea is one of the most exceptional fantasy storytellings that we have. Now, I am often surprised, at least in my circles, how few people seem to have read this work. In my opinion, it is nothing short of one of the most masterly crafted fantasy stories in history. There is a nature to Le Guin's prose that I have always struggled to put into words when describing this book to friends. It is like being in the world itself, having the story revealed to you as a spoken history, as if it were your own history. It's a part fantasy, part coming of age, part mystic wisdom, and for all of those reasons, there is so much to enjoy here, regardless of its fantasy setting. The Magicians by Lev Grossman has shot to a well-deserved fame after being adapted into a so-so TV series. This series of books might have one of the best elevator pitches of any novel. Harry Potter meets Narnia meets sex, drugs, violence, and rock and roll. The author asked a simple question: what would it look like if magic was real, true to life, and in an imperfect world? Grossman manages to capture all of the teenage experience that Harry Potter thought too risque to include, and all of the violent brutality of feudal kingdoms C.S. Lewis refused to imagine. It somewhat loses its way in the latter parts of the trilogy, but the first book is an absolute delight. The Promise of Blood by Brian McKellen is remarkable because of its unique setting, embracing the age of gunpowder and muskets into a fantasy setting rather than the more typical Tolkien-esque gnomes and goblins varieties. This is the French Revolution twisted with a unique gunpowder-based magic system. It's one of the less well-known works on this list, though it's still very popular, which says something about how popular in general these works on this list are. I haven't read any more obscure fantasy, which is exactly why you should recommend me some. I think that a lot of people, especially the more casual readers of the fantasy genre, may never have read or even thought about fantasy that fell outside of the Harry Potter setting or the Tolkien setting. And you must read this book to really see everything that fantasy can be. Patrick Rothfuss, with his two epic and sprawling, acclaimed Kingkiller Chronicles entries, is a fantasy author who stands with the very greats of the genre. The Slow Regard of Silent Things is a short, almost poetic novel that takes place in one of the most mysterious and enticing locations of that series, the university. I think it shows remarkable courage by Rothfuss to publish what is a whimsical, atmospheric, and somewhat of an oddity of a work. Many have read The Slow Regard of Silent Things expecting it to advance or reveal some of the plot of the Kingkiller Chronicles, and they walk away disappointed. If, like some people, you think Rothfuss has written a one-dimensional male sexual fantasy plot-armoured hero in the name of the wind, then this might change your mind as to the quality of Rothfuss as an author. I also think it's really interesting to read a fantasy book that doesn't portray a huge overarching story, a quest, a hero's journey. This is just an exploration of one character in a small setting for a small part of their life. It's quite rare for a novel to do that. I really enjoyed it. There are some glaring oversights in my fantasy reading education. I've never read Tolkien, I haven't read Discworld, and all I know about The Wheel of Time is that it's very long. So I very much look forward to your suggestions, because as you can see, I'm really not recommending any unknown or groundbreaking work here. If you like reading and you like books and you like learning from books, you might enjoy my Substack, which I'll put in the description box below. I want to thank you very much for listening. My name is Harry Smith, and this is Pages to Practice.